Councillor Mark Whittington, Executive Support Councillor for Resources, is likely to be joining us online, and Richard Bootroyd, who was expected, has given apologies. Okay. Councillor Hilton Spratt, Executive Support Councillor for People Management, is also present. Welcome, Hilton. I'd also like to welcome Andrew Crookham, Executive Director for Resources, who is a member of the corporate leadership team. As usual, I want to begin with a health and safety announcement. There's no fire drill this morning, so in the event of the fire alarm sounding, can we leave the building through the council chamber behind all of you, and go through the reception area into the front car park as usual, and then we need to wait in the car park for further instructions. Can I also please remind everyone, starting with myself, to ensure that the mobile phones are on silent. Also, when invited to speak, can you please ensure that your microphone is switched on and so that we can all hear you. If we don't, and those attending the meeting via Teams and members of the press and public listening in won't be able to hear what we've got to say. Finally, please be aware that you need to speak directly into the microphone, and if you do wish to speak during the meeting, can you please raise your hand as usual, and the Vice Chair, Tom, here will make a note. Can we now move to the agenda, please? Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence and replacement members. Emily, do we have any apologies or replacement members?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Rob Kendrick and Martin Kyle. If I could also note apologies from Councillor Richard Bootroyd and Debbie Bowles.
Thank you. Okay. Item 2, declarations of councillors' interests. Members of the OSMB are reminded that they will need to declare any relevant interest which have not been declared on their declarations of pecuniary interest forms. Do any members wish to declare an interest, please? No? Thank you. We then move on to item 3, minutes of the meeting on the 30th of March 2023. Can we just have them back, please? The minutes. Okay. Can we go through them? Page 1, does anybody want to say anything about page 1? Page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, and finally page 8. Do we agree the minutes of the meeting that's been circulated within our documents? If so, can you please indicate? Anyone opposing? Anyone wanting to make any comments about the minutes? No, that's agreed then. Thank you. Sorry. Yep.
Abstentions, Chair.
Abstentions. Okay, that's good for abstentions. Thank you. Okay, so we've dealt with minutes of the meeting on the 30th of March. Announcements by the Chair, Executive Councillors and Chief Officers. Okay. So, can we move to Andrew, please?
Nothing to announce from me, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Hilton, on behalf of Martin? Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Whittington, do you have anything to announce to us? No. Okay, and I've got nothing to announce. So we can then go on to item, 5, which is consideration of call-ins.
None received,
Emily,
Chairman.
No call-ins. Thank you. And item 6, consideration of councillors' call for action. Have we received any councillors' call for action?
No, none received, Chairman.
Okay. So we now move on to item 7, the refresh of the corporate plan. If we just look at our papers, we'll see that the board has been asked to consider proposals proposed updates via the corporate plan, which was agreed by the County Council back in 2019, and the aim is to ensure that it reflects successful delivery and remains relevant and responsive to evolving challenges and opportunities. So we're required to review the proposed changes to the corporate plan and provide feedback in advance of it being submitted to the meeting of the full council on the 19th of May for approval. The report will be presented by Matthew Garrard, Head of Policy. Matthew.
Thank you, Chairman. As you say, this report provides an opportunity to comment on a light refresh of the corporate plan. So, agreed in 2019, the corporate plan is a 10-year plan setting the Council's ambitions and priorities for Lincolnshire. It also identifies the challenges and strengths of the Council and its services. This refresh has three main purposes. The first is to ensure that the plan remains relevant in the changing world. So obviously, since the plan was adopted, the context and environment in which we work has changed. Society has moved on through the pandemic. We've had the aftershocks of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and these have added to financial pressures, higher costs, inflation, higher interest rates that you will all be familiar with. So the challenges section within the refresh plan has been updated to reflect these conditions, and hopefully you recognise them in the text that's in the plan. The second is to highlight the successes that the Council has made to date. So members of the committee will be familiar with many of these from your regular reviews of progress and the performance reporting that comes to you. And we've included a number of examples of these against each of the four main priorities within the plan. You may feel that there are other successes that you would prefer to see included. You might wish to make some of them more specific to improvements or successes that you are particularly proud of, or that you would prefer to see highlighted in the plan. So that opportunity is there as well. And then the third purpose is then obviously to build on our success to make sure that the actions of what we are going to do next reflects the progress that we've made, that changing environment and the things that the Council needs to focus on. So these are intended to be high-level actions, building on those successes, and they will then be detailed in the 2023 success framework. So alongside this review of the corporate plan, colleagues in performance have been reviewing the success framework and will bring you an updated model that then fits alongside the refreshed corporate plan with those more detailed and specific actions and performance measures for you to review. So further to your comments today, we'll be reviewing the final text of the plan with colleagues from communications to make sure that it's as accessible as possible, whilst also ensuring that the outcomes that are detailed in there are meaningful and can be delivered, so getting that balance of the language correct. For those familiar with the corporate plan document as a whole as it is now, you'll know that there's a wealth of statistics and infographics contained within that. We're reviewing those. Those were obviously included in 2019, so we've got a bit more data to bring those up to date. And then there's that refresh of the success framework that I mentioned previously. So, Chairman, all of that will be combined into a final report back to members at Annual Council in May, and I welcome the comments and feedbacks on the draft refresh plan as presented today.
Thank you. Lee, do you want to add anything?
No, nothing further, other than to just stress the point that Matthew's made in terms of the request to consider the content and to give feedback that we can then tweak the narrative with. So the intention is to bring it here as part of the policy development process, and we're committed to ensuring that the feedback gets played in and then updates the narrative before the council meeting.
Thank you. Dan, as policy advisor, do you have anything to add?
Nothing major to add, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Right, who wants to start off? Comments? Okay, well, sorry, Councillor Brockway, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this. Very, very informative. I wanted to ask a question on a point you'd made on page 20, creating further accommodation options for greater independence and well-being. A really good goal, something I would support tremendously. And I'd be interested to know more about it over time. No rush, and I don't need you to go away and do a lot of work or anything. And the reason for that is I've recently had a conversation with some officers at West Lindsey about the type of accommodation that is being made available both in the private and the public sector, where there is a problem with accommodation room sizes being created in such a way that they're too small for families, bedrooms too small, living rooms, sitting rooms, whatever, too small without an appropriate dining area in a family house, and where there is considerable concern about the added stress that cramping of accommodation is putting on people who may already be under stress. Now, I do know that one or two of the districts are looking to try and do something about this in future planning, but I'd be interested to know, or to ask you, if we could include that in our thinking as well, please. And so if at any time you've got more information, I'm very interested in this. Thank you ever so much. Thank you, Chairman.
Any comments?
I think it's something we can take away and make sure that the member gets more information on that as set out. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Hugo.
Morning, Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you know, you read through this document and it covers most aspects, and we'd perhaps all agree that, yeah, it's fine, it's covered. I think, though, for me, it's when you actually go further down and see the reality of what's happening on the ground doesn't quite marry up as much. I mean, creating a thriving environment, you know, I completely agree with that, but there's so much more we could do. You know, I walk round and I see sort of parks that are just half shabby, and, you know, and sort of walkways that really aren't very good, and woods and forestry commission and public sector areas and open space that could be improved throughout, you know, and even in our towns there's little grot spots and all sorts, and I think we need to make sure that we do drill deep and actually embed this sort of thing into our systems. You know, we talk about a greater Lincolnshire tourism plan. Actually, I haven't really seen that, and if I have, it wasn't really worth reading. So I think there is more that we can do. It's right that we've got it covered. But take even a simple thing. From Louth to Boston, you cannot connect via public transport. You know, that's the A16. You cannot get a bus. So I dropped my son off at Stickney, who then has to catch a bus to Boston, a train from Boston to Lincoln, and then another train from Lincoln back to Market Raisin. And actually, it's like, oh my God. And then he could get back to Cleethorpes. And you think, seriously, there is no public transport going down the A16, one of the busiest connected routes in Lincolnshire. That's not thriving, you know, and I think we need, you know, I just hope that officers look at this and really drill it down to what's going on the floor. And that would be my comments. Thank you.
Yep, so thank you, Chairman. So appreciate the comments and recognition that the overall aspirations are what they should be. The specific detailed examples, what we'll do is we'll feed that back into officers working around the success framework and the specific actions going into that for them to consider and reflect on in the development of that, which will obviously come back to you in due course.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. And whilst I appreciate my question is relying pretty much wholly on partners, what actions have we taken as much as we can with respect to our partnership working with regards to mental health? Because due to the COVID-19 pandemic, wait times are now well in excess of NICE guidance, and this is also alongside increasingly long lead times for operations, even minor operations for various things, and also simple things such as, say, prosthetics, for example, is taking longer and longer. And as somebody whose mother is needing prosthetics when you don't have them and you want to be independent, it's frustrating and you can't be. And I think, similar to Councillor Marfleet's point, I think we need to acknowledge that actually, as we had this discussion in Health Scrutiny recently, compared to our neighbours, we are actually quite poorly served when it comes to health. Whether we like that or not, that is the facts. Whether it's dentistry, which is a big problem, whether it's certain specialties. I mean, I, for example, go to Nottingham for my specialty because there isn't one in the entirety of Lincolnshire. And I think we need to really, as has been said, drill down into that and reflect that and actually have a frank and honest conversation with our health colleagues, rather than what certainly looked to me almost as, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but it looked very much as, this is what we want, this is the window dressing, but actually the reality is very different to the window dressing.
So valid points, and that's part of the reason that we've considered the refresh of the plan. Since the plan was originally written, the development of the integrated care system has accelerated within Lincolnshire, and that sees much greater levels of joint working and influence from the council on the health system. So certainly through the work that Michelle's been leading on and others, we are working much more closely with health partners across the entire system, including mental health, to review where systems integrate and to review how we get the greatest impact from the funding that's available. Now, some of those challenges you've set out are large and knotty issues that will take some time to work through. I think now that there's a integrated care strategy, that gives us some greater focus on the activities that we will need to focus on over the coming years. The plan seeks to recognise that dynamic in the background. So it seeks to recognise the fact that we are able to exert influence within that area. And again, the success framework that has been referred to earlier will contain information about activities that we'll take to push that ahead. But it's recognised that there's the kind of varied provision and dynamic that you've set out.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, while you're thinking, I've got a couple of questions. The first one relates to the 2019 key priorities. And I'd like you to tell us how well we did in achieving those priorities. And linked to that is, what sort of criteria have we got for measuring whatever comes out of this paper, which goes to full council, we've got for confirming that we're doing it. So the reason I ask that as much as anything is because high aspirations is very difficult to quantify. It's a qualitative judgment, and I'm not trying to use clever words, but qualitative and quantitative are two quite different things. And most people are about quality of life, which isn't always quantifiable.
Thank you, Chairman. So one of the things we've been looking at with the refresh of the plan is to try and ensure that it is easier to be able to understand actually what progress has been made and what the impact of that progress is. Part of the reason why we've streamlined some of the sections within the plan so that you now have a very clear section around what success looks like and the actions that are going to follow is to address exactly that, because there was a lot of information in there, and sometimes it was hard to pin down the specifics of what you were going to try and achieve. So also for some of these words, what we're trying to do as well is apply what you might think of as being the sort of Mars bar test. So what you don't want is a priority in there that says that you're going to you're going to try and do everything in one success looks like a section. So for example, you don't want to have something in that says you're going to make it great for everyone to live, work, play, rest, and do everything in one section, because that's then really hard to performance manage and actually to deliver on. So we're trying to make these succinct and focused, and also we've moved some of them around between the sections so that we've hopefully got the right balance that those that are in supporting high aspirations really are about the individual person and high aspirations, living life to the full. The section, the measures and actions within that are very much around that extra support that gives everyone the opportunity where they need that bit of additional support. I'm trying to just get the balance right in the document, so actually it is then easier to performance manage. So alongside this, we've been working with colleagues in the performance service to review the measures that you already receive, to make sure where there are sort of mismatches that we alter those and get a framework that is really quite meaningful and tight on each of those measures. I'd say we're not there yet. That work's still in progress. And hopefully we then get something that really does gel and fit together, makes it easier for us as officers to deliver and see the progress that we're making, but also makes it easier for you to hold officers to account and to provide that scrutiny role over what's been undertaken. So there is a lot of work going on to address the point that you're making, that we need to make sure that we can actually manage and deliver this effectively. So that's all in progress. Obviously the progress to date since 2019, you get the regular reporting. I think you've got Q4 reporting in the next few months, and that will give you the sort of overall picture as we then move into the refreshed version of the plan.
Okay. two more points, building on, well, not building, asking something that comes out of what you've just said. How do we measure high aspirations? Okay, I mean, that's a real serious question, because we are determined that in the coming years, people and communities, that's even more difficult, is to get a community to be aspirational, highly aspirational. So how do we measure this? And secondly, I think words can mean different things to different people, because on this front page we have a statement that says we want to be a council that continues to offer our residents the services they need and the lifestyle they deserve. And that word deserve is really open to challenge, because how can anybody say what somebody deserves? The lifestyle they deserve is really so qualitative, not quantitative. And yeah, it's desert is a concept that I think we would never be able to translate into saying yes or no. So I'd be interested. I mean, it's the lifestyle. We need to think. I can't help but feel of a different word to deserve.
I think that's a really good challenge, Chairman. I think that is a word we can look at how that actually plays out, and we can have a look at some alternatives. I think you're absolutely right to challenge us on that. So that's something we can take away and look at. In terms of measuring high aspirations, I think the simple answer is there is no one measure that will tell you whether people have whether we're supporting high aspirations. The intention is through those 5 success looks like bullets that should give us if we are doing well against each of those 5 things. In theory, we should be demonstrating that we're supporting high aspirations. So if we're taking the actions against each of those 5 bullet points, if the measures that we've identified for each of those 5 success looks like are going the right way, then hopefully we're making that positive impact for our communities.
Yeah, good. Sorry, Lee, go on.
So in terms of the existing success framework, high aspirations looks at a range of different things. So it looks at educational attainment, and it is seeking that every child has excellent prospects through their educational attainment. We've got the sustaining and vibrant communities, certainly something that Public Protection Committee looks at on a regular basis in terms of the volunteering aspects and performance of services such as fire and rescue, in terms of ensuring that people live in healthy and safe environments. There's also ambitions around growth for Lincolnshire in terms of skills attainment and attraction and retention of talent. So trying to ensure that Lincolnshire is seen as somewhere that is progressive and gives opportunity to its residents. So as Matthew says, there's a range of different angles on it. I think the wording, we can work with colleagues in comms to ensure that it's as meaningful as possible, but it's trying to look across a broad spectrum of stages in life to make sure that people have got the opportunity and the choice that they require or deserve as they progress through life within Lincolnshire.
Okay. Just one other point. The success looks like, and the only one that I can see that gets something close to what I would call people with disabilities or people in older age, is residents have a rewarding and active and healthy lifestyles. That's seriously aspirational, isn't it? Because the older you get, the more likely you are not to be healthy. So I wondered about participation, because that really, with a rural county like Lincolnshire, participation is often restricted by travel problems, and I just wondered how we managed to satisfy that, because setting the bar high is one thing, but making it virtually impossible is another.
Yeah, I think, again, that's around looking at what we've got in there and framing the words and then taking away the particular action to make sure that then actually what we're setting out to achieve is achievable. So happy to take that away as well.
Okay, anybody else want to comment? No, this paper is going to full council, so we'll have another debate on this with 70 people. Sorry, Phil, do you want to come in? Yep.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I mean, I welcome the paper. You know, it's high aspirations is to be welcomed, of course. I just wanted to pick up on the. I mean, some of it is it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because we're not in control of everything. And I look at the educational. You know, that we want to champion, or we're going to champion educational excellence across Lincolnshire. Of course, we're limited by the academisation programme and the fact that our, you know, the local education authority has been pretty much demolished, if I could put it that way. So it's really how are we going to do that? You know, what's the plan? And really also around the climate change. Similarly, you know, we don't have control over the built environment largely. We do over our own estate, of course, but you know, the planning authorities of the districts, and they're restricted by the national pressures on house building, etc. And as yet, there isn't, as far as I can see, a level playing field on getting houses that we want built that are going to meet the climate change challenges. So it's a kind of how are we going to work closer, perhaps, with our partners, if I could put it that way. Thank you. So it's more of a comment than a question, but hopefully some debate there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it?
It is, Chairman, and just to comment, I think when you look at the success, it looks like that is the ambition statements, what we're trying to achieve, and it's recognised that we can't do it alone. They do have to inform the way that the council works with its partners. When you start to look at the further actions column, that's more specific to what we're going to try and do as an organisation working with our partners, but then obviously then the detail then stems into the success framework. But yes, it's recognised that we can't achieve this alone.
Okay, Phil. Yeah, Tom, and then Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. It goes back to a point you touched on around avoiding what a number of my colleagues when I was on district would call the brain drain, which is that the youth who are often born here will often then go to university and then they stay away from Lincolnshire. They then come back in their later years and retire. And it's simple, to my mind. It's basic things. It's, for example, there are some parts in my division and we still don't have the minimum requirement for what is categorised under universal service right as a decent internet connection, which is 10 megabits a second. You know, if you want to run your own business or you want to, just as a young person, even simple things, personal things, you want to stream, you want to do whatever, you need a decent internet speed. And until things like that are sorted, you're now going to struggle to innovate your economy to get things like aerospace, more technological heavy industry into an area if the road network is, if they deem it A, insufficient, and B, if your broadband and your digital infrastructure is insufficient. And I know they're Herculean tasks, and they're not something we can deal with on our own. We need support from the, Openreach, BT, all the other internet companies, and we need support from government in terms of finance with highways. But I'm conscious I don't want us to set ourselves up to fail because we're going to promise to do all this wonderful work. And actually, when you're looking and go, actually, we can do about this much. But if the other partners don't want to play ball, we could do this much. But if the other partners aren't going to play ball, then we can't. And it's just wording that appropriately so that we're not setting ourselves up to fail, Chairman, because I think that would do a disservice to officers' time and also the purpose of the corporate plan, Chairman.
So, ambitious but not too ambitious, I think is what you're saying. Does anybody want to comment?
So the brain drain piece is recognised, and that's about how we support the growth of the economy, how we get high-skilled, high-valued jobs within our economy so that people are attracted to Lincolnshire and retain and stay in Lincolnshire. I think that this committee's seen various updates in the past from BD UK projects in terms of the enhancement of broadband connectivity, and that work continues. Clearly, we have to work with national providers on that, and there's some constraint. Part of the corporate plan ambition is to achieve a devolution deal for Greater Lincolnshire, and part of that is to be able to exert greater influence on national providers to bring those things through at a faster pace and achieve the outcomes we want to see. That has direct influence on infrastructure and ensuring that road networks, that data connections, etc., are where they should be, but also places a focus on growing the skills that Lincolnshire will require for future economies. The aspiration is there, and the activity is taking place to drive that forward, and that will be reflected within the success framework. Clearly, there's a long road ahead of us to get to the point where funding and powers are devolved to the region, but that's a primary way that we would see that being enhanced to the degree that you've set out.
Thanks for that, Lee. Ian.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I wanted to pick up on a point that Councillor Dilks made, but actually I'm going to tie into that Councillor Smith's comment about setting ourselves up to fail. And with relation to new houses and how we make them energy efficient and how we make them fit for living, which is another comment that came up earlier, I just draw colleagues' attention to something that happened within the last 2 weeks, which is the sign-off of the 2023 iteration of the Central Lincolnshire Local Plan. And we talked about partnership. That is a partnership between 3 local planning authorities, North Kesteven, City of Lincoln and West Lindsey, and, crucially, Chairman, this council, Lincolnshire County Council. 4 years ago, at a meeting in Committee Room 1, just up the corridor, we started a process of the 5-year review. And I remember the consultants in that meeting being very disparaging about our aspirations for energy efficient houses and tackling climate change, and saying, nah, you won't be able to do that. And I remember saying to the particular consultant, who is doubtless served very well, but is no longer with us, yes, we will. And 4 years later, almost to the day, it was a June meeting, and we did the sign-off in April. We have the most ambitious local plan in terms of climate change response, in terms of the energy efficiency of dwellings, basically in the country. And we were told in that meeting, in fact, that central government is looking at it very closely and using it as a template. So you can, there was a reference made by Councillor Dilks, and I know where he's coming from, that we would be held back by central government. We absolutely intentionally set out to push the boundaries as far as they could be pushed. There was a lot of internal debate. It was 4 years, very hard work with 4 democratic partners, but we got there. We achieved that ambition. You can do it if you try. So, yes, I acknowledge that could have fallen under the definition of setting ourselves up to fail. But if you don't have ambition, difficult though it may be to quantify, Chairman, I absolutely understand where you're coming from on that. But if you don't have ambition, just because something's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't try it. And I think that the Central Lincolnshire Local Plan, 4 partners working together, is absolute testament to the way that you can realise ambition and actually do something which will make a genuine difference to the lives of our residents, not only today and tomorrow, but because a house might have a lifetime of 100 or 200 years for generations to come. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks. That's a good reminder, Ian. Something that could well go into the final version of this paper that's going to the full council is something to say about success is possible. Okay. Anybody else, finally? No? Okay, so just to look back, what are we asked to do? The Review and Scrutiny Committee is invited to review the proposed changes to the corporate plan and where does it go? And provide feedback in advance of it being submitted to the meeting of the County Council on the 19th of May for approval. Those in favour of saying that we've done that? Anybody against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you. Thanks for your contributions. Much obliged. Okay, so we now move on to item 8. Again. Performance of the Corporate Support Services contract. What we are about is an update of the Serco performance against key performance indicators Okay, so over to, I know Ian Blundell from Serco is here. Thank you.
I think the Arne's going to present the report.
Right, Arne. Thank you, Arne.
No problem. Thank you, Chairman. Morning, everyone. My name's Arne Hobbohm. I'm the Corporate Support Services Contract Manager, and I'm joined today, as the Chairman said, by Ian Blundell, who's the Head of Transactional Services for Serco here in Lincoln. He'll give us a few comments on how they've been getting on towards the end of this report. But first, I will take you through how we've been getting on in the last 6 months. So those of you who it's a regular report, although every 6 months now. So this particular one concerns itself with the period from October 2022 to March 2023, and was last reported before then to you on the 27th of October. So a quick reminder that the Corporate Support Services contract comprises 4 areas: CSC, IMT, Finance and People Management. And this report covers months 91 to 96 of the contract, which has been running since the 1st of April 2015. So Section 3 outlines the performance in summary of the key performance indicators which this report is here to report on, and it explains how many of those have achieved their target service level, how many achieved the minimum service level, how many fell below, and how many were mitigated. So it's an exception report, so we're only talking about those things where exceptions occurred. There are few of those. Table 1 sets out the summary of the situation, which is that essentially many targets were achieved, none fell below the target, and none fell below the minimum service level. So we've had 6 months of completely clear performance. There were some mitigations, which I'll go into shortly. A point to note is that we dropped by 1 KPI in December 2022, and apologies, a small addendum there at the bottom of the table. It refers to table 3 later in the report, which doesn't exist. It is in fact 0.7A, it should say there. Apologies for that. So as I said, there were no failures, no green, no red or ambers, and so we move on to a review of those areas where mitigation was granted during the period. And the first of these was for Customer Service Centre KPI 04, which is the abandoned call KPI. So this measures how many calls to the Customer Service Centre were abandoned by callers. In other words, they hung up before the call was answered. And we granted mitigation between the period of October 2022 until January 2023. And the reason for the granting this mitigation was because the council had directed the CSE to divert resource to support a number of phases for user acceptance testing and the subsequent implementation of the council's telephony system called Avaya. So what that means is that in order to divert that resource, fewer agents are available to answer calls, and this can have an effect on the abandoned call rate, and so we granted mitigation for that period. After the implementation of the Avaya, the revised Avaya telephony system, there were a number of legacy problems with the new system that really affected very few people, but did specifically affect the customer service centre, and that was that there was a problem with the callback system, which is the system whereby a caller can press a button and ask to have a callback received. There was an issue with emails, which were normally handled by the Avaya system, but were not able to be automatically distributed. And finally, there was an inability to record what's known as the wrap time, which is the period of time that the CSC agent spends not on the actual call itself, but on its associated administration. All of these things have been improving, and I'm pleased to report that that KPI returned to green status in February, and there have been no further issues since then. But I would point out that the Council is shortly to move towards a replacement for Avaya, which is called Microsoft Anywhere 365, which is due for implementation in around about May. And so there may be some further disruption, but we will keep a close eye on that. The second mitigated item was CSE KPI 05. So this is about contacts responded to within a time scale. This particular KPI is composited from a number of subsets, and these include the speed at which text and email messages were responded to within a target period. In the case of text, it's 100% within 1 business day. In the case of email, it's 90% within 1 business day. So between the period of November 22 and January 23, mitigation was granted for the same reasons, because of the Avaya issues that were mentioned in the previous item. Again, it returned to green in February with the further caveat that anywhere 365 may have an impact on that in future. The next item was again in the CSC, KPI 13 this time. So this is a new KPI, and from the 1st of October 22, the Council changed how it procures carers' services. And as a result of that change, the CSC was asked to perform some additional duties, most specifically a front-end triage to incoming calls. And this required additional resource, which was put in at the time with the express plan that it would be reviewed again to ensure that it was fit for purpose. And whilst it is essentially fit for purpose, it was agreed that some further resource was required now that a review had taken place. And this resource is currently in the process of being recruited. And so, again, we have granted mitigation on this particular point until that recruitment can be achieved, which we're currently aiming to achieve by July. In the IMT area, we had a mitigation for IMT KPI 18, only for the month of October 2022, and it has returned to green since then. This one concerns what's known as the Priority 3 and Priority 4 incidents for the IMT service, which are the more minor ones, tend to be individual issues. And these have targets that need to be met within certain periods of time, as stated here, and the overall target for resolution within those times is 91%. During normal operational times, these are considered to be challenging but meaningful and achievable targets, but there are times when, as a result of actions that the Council has asked Serco to take, additional pressures may occur, and in this particular case, the migration to the Microsoft Office 365 system caused that additional pressure because staff from the service desk were diverted to help with the implementation and subsequent answering of queries and providing support for that implementation. Further to that, we also asked them to turn effort towards recovering existing internal licenses of Microsoft Office 365. Originally, we'd received a request to purchase additional O365 licenses, and instead of that, we chose to divert the resource to recover unused ones internally. This was a success, and it was not necessary to purchase additional licenses. We were able to recover sufficient internals to achieve the objective, which saved the Council a significant amount of money. As I say, that was only for the month of October and returned to green status. And finally, IMT KPI 9 was also granted mitigation only for the month of October, and it has also returned to green since then for the same reasons. In this report, we've also been asked to provide you an insight into any changes that have occurred to KPIs during the process. As you'd expect, this contract's been in existence for a long time. KPIs do lose their efficacy and maybe become irrelevant as a result of changes, and so we are constantly vigilant in terms of ensuring that they are fit for purpose. There are currently 38 performance indicators, as you saw in Table 1 earlier, and we review them continuously, and they may be changed, they may be removed altogether. And just by way of demonstration, I was invited to put some commentary in about how much change there's been. So in the 5 years since the 1st of April, we've deleted 13 of the 40-odd KPIs that we had at the time and replaced them with 11 new ones, so quite a bit of activity, as you can see. There's usually something on the go at any one point in time. And on that note, during this last 6-month period, there have indeed been some changes, and one of those was item 7A, which is the deletion of ACF KPI 07. This is a KPI, very specific one, that measured the provision of necessary paperwork for the council to ensure that effective services were provided around the business of deferred payments within adult social care. In this particular case, as a result of a change in response to the Care Act, the deferred payment applications, which were previously distributed by Serco, have moved to frontline LCC staff to distribute. This has speeded up the process of deferred payments so that end users have more time to make decisions, so it's an improvement for end users. However, what that did was clearly removed Serco's part in the process and therefore made that KPI obsolete. So to make good use of the abatement points that are associated with that, we have removed that KPI, not replaced it with anything else, but redistributed the abatement points to the remaining ACF KPIs so that there is no change in terms of the pressures on Serco to perform in the contract. And finally, we replaced CSE KPI 11 with a new one, CSE KPI 13. Again, this was, as mentioned before, as a result of a change in the way the council procures carers services, and specifically the end of the carers first contract. It introduced this triage service that I mentioned, and therefore we needed to measure something that was more relevant to that triage service rather than the previous measure, which was no longer relevant. In item 8, you'll see that we have continued to perform a green trend analysis, and as a quick reminder to this, what we do with this one is that we look at all of the green performance levels over, and it's now quite a long data set, goes back 5 years now, and in that data set we're examining the direction of travel for green KPIs, so to test whether they are steady, improving, declining, and should they be declining, whether there was any risk of them failing at any point in the future. And the result of the review at the end of February showed that 79% of the KPIs were stable or improving, and that none of them were on a trajectory to fail or to fall below the TSL before the end of the contract. In section 9, you'll see a brief table 2 there, which shows the abatement points that have been applied in the contract. So as a reminder, the abatement points are the tool by which we provide assurance that KPIs are met and hold Serco to account financially for any underperformance. The table is intended to be a visual representation rather than particularly detailed, and you may note that from last time I've now moved it to a quarterly table simply because we've run out of space to fit it on the page. But the visual purpose of it is to demonstrate that a great many abatement points were applied in the early years of the contract, and in the latter years considerably fewer have been applied as a result of much improved performance. So in conclusion, this has been, as mentioned already, a strong period of review for the last 6 months, no failures. I mentioned last time that Serco had been experiencing some difficulties in the recruitment market. It's still a challenging market, but the situation is improving, and Serco have done really quite remarkably well in recruiting quite a few new staff where there have been vacancies, and really appreciate the efforts they've put in to achieve those things. So as mentioned at the beginning, Ian Blundell has joined us, and so he'll give us a few extra words from the Serco perspective.
Yeah, Ian, do you want to speak on behalf of Serco?
Yeah. Great, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Arnd. Yeah, the Lincolnshire Strategic Partnership for Serco is broken down into a number of different function areas. What I was hoping to do here is just go through and keep this as brief as I can do. I'm just going to cherry pick out a number of highlights from different service areas and then we'll run through some elements around the social values from our partnership as well. So starting off with the IMT area, our monthly service reviews have continued to receive really positive feedback, and the IT service desk tickets are continuing to reduce month on month, which has been a really big positive. More recently, the IT tech bar implementation has received really good feedback, again with positive take-up, and that service continues to grow and support a number of different areas. We're also working very positively with the authority's new interim Chief Information Officer with key priorities around system security audits, Microsoft 365 and cybersecurity policy procedures to ensure that we're kind of always one step ahead. Transactional services, which is my own personal area. One of the biggest highlights so far has been the Business World ERP platform implementation, which we've been working on for the last 2 years. We've put a significant amount of work into this one. It's been a real highlight for our teams to work in collaboration with the council officers to ensure the smooth transition of the new ERP platform. And we've also gone through and made sure that the closure of accounts has been another really successful this year, and where everything was closed down by the 31st of March, which tends to get better and better year on year. From the contact service centre, as Alan mentioned earlier on, the Anywhere 365 project continues to be fully supported by our operational and management team over at the Serco Lincolnshire contract. The other big item around really is around the customer digital delivery project, which is a joint Serco and council initiative to improve access via digital methods for citizens of Lincolnshire, including web chat and a lot of other functionality as well. So that's currently proceeding as planned and is fully on schedule. The final area around the contact centre is around the Bridget Care pilot, which continues to support carers across Lincolnshire as part of the authority's digital agenda. So the separate digital access channel supports unpaid carers by creating an online support plan and signpost information to help support them via an online 24/7 channel. Currently there's around 100 support plans that have already been created, and this service continues to grow. Hopefully the pilot will have a successful conclusion. So outside of the operational service areas, we've also gone through and put a significant investment around social values to ensure we kind of go through and give as much back as we can do to the citizens of Lincolnshire. So firstly, we've actively engaged with community-sponsored partners such as Community Grocer, providing meals to vulnerable Lincolnshire residents, St Barnabas supporting Lincolnshire nurses training, Little Miracles by funding pantomimes for around 820 children with life-limiting conditions, and also supporting Dementia UK as our primary charity partner. Within Serco Thomas Parker House staff, we volunteered in excess of 550 hours to community and charitable organisations across the county. Additionally, we've gone through and supported 3 young individuals into employment following our employability and internal mentoring scheme. Serco has also supported 8 educational establishments across the county with a wide range of employment and enterprise activities. And very finally, we've gone through and issued in excess of 100 unlimited mobile data SIMs to help support Lincolnshire's most vulnerable citizens. So hopefully that's been useful. I'm happy to take any questions if required.
Yeah, Mike. Thank you, Chairman. Mine is, I've got a query on the process of agreeing mitigation. Before directing resources, i.e. customer service centre staff, is the mitigation agreed before you divert those resources, i.e. you've looked at the KPIs that diverting those resources is going to affect, or is the decision taken to divert the resources and then the effects on the other key KPIs are seen later, and then the mitigation is agreed then. I'm just wondering how that process of agreeing mitigation works. Thank you, and thank you for the report, Arndt and Ian. Thank you.
Right, who wants to answer that?
I'll answer that, Chairman.
Thank you.
So it's a very good question, and mitigation is not something we enter into lightly. That's the first thing I would want to say. The default is we do not grant mitigation, and I'm sure Ian will say that many tough conversations I've had with him over the years about this matter. So mitigation is a last resort. Having said that, the purpose of the contract is to achieve the best possible services for the money the council lays out. And there are times when mitigation is appropriate, simply because if we were to say mitigation was not to be granted, then that would mean that Ian's team, say, would end up focusing on delivering the KPIs, and that might be suboptimal as far as service delivery is concerned. So it's quite a fine decision, and we don't make it lightly. However, to answer your question, the key point is that we will always be approached in the first instance to be warned that there is a pressure approaching. We may well ask for something, and in asking for something, such as can you divert some resource, we may get no response. We may just get an answer from Ian's team or others. That's fine, we can do that. Other times they may say, that's quite substantial. Can we flag that mitigation may be needed? And I will say, noted, and we will grant mitigation should it prove to be needed. So we don't just give a blanket mitigation. Mitigation happens in stages, and typically 1 month at a time. Occasionally more than that, but typically just for 1 month. And we will still ask for a report on what the performance is, so we know what the score was even though it missed. And in fact, on occasion it will be green, because they were worried, but actually they managed both. Sometimes they fall below, and we will grant mitigation. Mitigation really just relieves them from the penalty of service credits, which can be very punitive for even quite a near miss. And so on that basis, we like to be as reasonable as possible and get the best possible benefits for the council in terms of money invested.
Okay. Right, could I the point that I want to make about page 26 and page 27 is essentially the fact that both of you are here representing the County Council and Serco enables us to talk about we, and this is the we, because if we didn't have a contract, then it would be just down to the County Council, okay? And it's we, councillors, that have to recognise that outside the outside world, people are affected. And one of the most basic things that you can expect to do as a resident in Lincolnshire is to ring Lincolnshire County Council. So if people abandon calls quite simply because they can't get through, then that reflects on all of us. In much the same way that if the callback system doesn't work, or emails can't be delivered within the organisation, that shows that we are not performing to maximum effect. In the same way, the system was unable to record wraparound time. Okay, so they're things that the County Council failed to do. Okay, right, so what I'm actually saying is, yes, we have a target range, but I'm more interested in impact rather than was it below a threshold. And one of the things that's missing, really, is some indication as to what was the impact in numbers of calls, for example, because it's significant to my point of view in relation to all of these. Callbacks failed, emails couldn't be delivered. So what can we say from a quantitative point of view about what we didn't do as a result of these failures, which are still within our system?
Excellent question, of course. And I'll start by saying that the number of calls, for instance, the number of callbacks that were not able to be programmed in by a caller does not translate into a failure of service necessarily, in fact rarely does. The typical experience of a caller who is unable to program a callback is that they ring again, and they will get through next time. It just happened to be the case that too many agents were busy at that very moment, because the nature of receiving telephony, of course, as you'd expect, is it doesn't come in a nice steady dribble. It comes in peaks and troughs, and the contact centre has to staff accordingly to allow itself to be able to respond to those peaks and troughs, but at the most optimal cost to the council. And this can be difficult to do, and certainly, as I mentioned about the wrap time, without the information about what wrap time is being used, it's very difficult to schedule the resourcing to ensure that enough people are available at any one time, because it is a very complex process of planning that goes into managing a customer service centre. It isn't as simple as there's a bunch of people sitting at phones waiting for them to ring. It's a complex management process to precisely target the resource at any one time. So callbacks has been an issue, but there has been a workaround for callbacks that Serco have employed in the CSC, as indeed for the emails, as indeed for the wrap time. And so, in fact, the true effect of that is likely to have been very minimal. We certainly didn't receive any complaints that people were completely unable to get through, for instance. So it impacts the essential experience, because I'd like to get through first time when I ring somewhere, and it's annoying when I can't, but I'll try again and I'll get through, my problem is solved, and I've moved on. So it's hard to quantify the effect of that first failure, if you see what I mean. Also, counting the number of calls missed is a very haphazard method of determining the degree to which service has failed, because we don't know what the nature of the call is. It could be a very dramatic call, or in most cases it could be something really very simple, like a request for some information, or a basic request of some sort that is dealt with readily later. We could provide a report with all that detail. It's very dense. You're more than welcome to see it.
You've just said that you could, but so far we haven't. We haven't got that information. Now, it could be that outside of this meeting the discussion could take place about it. Okay, but it does seem perhaps more important to councillors that calls are going missed, emails can't be delivered. It isn't. If the numbers are large, then we would want to know about it. And I'm not at the moment convinced, but may well be if people outside, councillors outside this meeting have a discussion about it in more depth. But could you at least bear in mind that, that I, if nobody else, is interested in trying to translate something from not mitigated to, mitigated to quantitative numbers. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Phil.
Thanks, Chairman. I did want to raise something about the numbers, but before I do, it's just about the mitigation, and I understand why we have the mitigation, and I welcome the whole report, can I just say. But is my understanding that if we hadn't got the blue box at the bottom with the mitigation agreed, that if we didn't do the mitigation, then we would surely, we would be not meeting the target. That's what the whole point of it is. So those 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 and so on wouldn't be zeros. They would be 3, 2, 1 and some zeros. I'm right in that, aren't I, please? But then I did want to sort of ask, and it follows up from yours, Chairman, if I may, on the abandoned calls. I welcome the fact that it says that our target service level achieved is 7% of lost calls, and other authorities is higher than that. But there is no sort of indication of how many calls do we actually lose. What is the actual numbers? And do we forgive me, I don't know what happens. I don't call the main number that often, but is there a message that says, if urgent, this is what you should do, you know, try emailing or whatever? Do we actually do that? And on the number of calls, are they reducing or increasing? In other words, I'm asking, what's the effect of people now being encouraged, if they are encouraged, to use emails as a method of contacting the council? I welcome the fact that the target service level for text messages responded to is 100%, and for emails 90% within 1 business day. That is welcome and impressive. But is that a simply an acknowledgement of the call or text or email, or is it a resolution of the problem? Thank you.
Over to you, Arne.
Quite a few things there. Thank you very much for that. So I'll start at the back end of your question. So in terms of your 100% target on emails and the 90 on texts, this is a response. So we've received your email, thank you, we're actioning it. It would be impossible for it to be 100% in 1 day. If the request were complex, it may literally be impossible to answer it immediately. A great many of the calls are answered first time. What was your other question?
It was about numbers of calls lost.
Yes, right. So
and I also what is the average weight? You know, is it a couple of rings or 20 rings or what? You know.
So average weight is also quite a question. The CSC has many channels into which calls are organised when they call. So you mentioned about emails and trying to get callers to use alternative channels. Email is one we invite them to use. There has been a gradual and steady long-term decline in the number of telephone contacts the council receives as we move to other methods. And we also try to direct them to the website so they can often find answers to questions they previously asked. Because we do get calls like, what time's the castle open and stuff like that. So that has been a success longer term. The average wait time, we have a wait time for every single one of the channels that we operate, and there are probably 40 odd channels altogether for all the different services and sub-services within the council. Each one will have its own wait time. Again, as I say, the report, this information is available, we study it, but to present it here would be extensive, but obviously more than happy to share anything you want to see. I would like to reiterate that in terms of what it says in the issues around callbacks, emails, and if there were substantial failings, I would report them here. The failings have been marginal in terms of falling short of target service levels. They are not vast. And as I say, with callbacks, we do get, people will retry and they will get through, usually on the second attempt. The email issue is not a question of emails failing to be delivered. All emails were delivered, but they ended up in the council's ordinary email system, which meant that it was a manual task to distribute them to the relevant agent rather than automation, which is what should be happening. And again, the wrap time has been resolved through a manual process adopted by the CSC temporarily. And we have been back to green since February, as I said. So we've took a little dip and then we're back in action.
Thanks, Arne. Jackie and then Martin.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. This is very interesting. This mitigation seems to be exercising us all this morning. Mine's a very specific question about that on page 28 about KPI 18. Now, the third paragraph there talks about the retrieval of licenses for Microsoft Office 365, which seems to me to be a very sensible move. You know, you found these spare licenses, you get in there and use what you've got instead of buying new licenses. Excellent, good business working. But then later on, it talks about the KPI returning to green, because obviously if you're taking on this extra work, it is going to affect the service desk, because this extra work came in. I'm not sure why there should be any deterioration of your rating if you have found something which is positive and which you are attempting to work through to make it better for the council. So if you were green before that happened and then you took on that piece of extra work, which obviously will slow down other work if you've got the same number of people taking on this extra work, is the KPI rating, is it then dropped while you're doing that and then returns to green, or is it suspended? Because I don't see why it should drop when what you're doing is actually taking a positive action. So could you clarify that one for me, please? And then I've got another quick question, Chairman, if I may.
Okay. So first things first. In this particular case, the target is 91% resolution within the times, and targets for KPIs never drop in any circumstances, including in mitigation. What happens is that the result may be lower than the target, and in those circumstances we relieve Serco from the impact of service credits, which would otherwise be a potentially significant financial cost to them. In this particular case, you've pointed out item 18, so the target is 91%, and in that 1 month when we granted mitigation, the actual score was 85.72, so they did well, and it was above our minimum service target. So in terms of what our minimum expectations are, it was still better than that. It just failed the target service level. And the reason is because the service desk staff were asked by us to divert their efforts into the recovery of licences, which we felt that on balance was a better use of the council's resources to recover those licences and not buy new ones than it was to demand that they hit the target and don't release the staff for that purpose. Because the alternative would have been not releasing the service desk staff, buying more licences, a net cost to the council. This way, no net cost to the council, saved the money from the new licences.
Okay. Can I come back on that? Yeah, I get that, and it isn't the KPI I'm thinking is reducing, it's their rating. If their rating is green before we ask them to do that task, and then I notice it says they returned to green. So surely if we're asking them to do a task, they should have retained that green rating all the way through, even if they didn't meet the KPI, because we're changing the task, we're checking extra stuff in at them.
I see what you're saying, right. So
yeah, so did their rating drop during that period, or was it suspended?
It's a level of performance measure. So, and the red, amber, green rating and the blue is purely how did they perform against the target. 91% in this case, they were just below. So it would have been an amber. So the question we then have to ask is it an amber? In which case service credits would apply and a financial penalty would apply for not meeting the target? Or do we accept that we ask them to do something in the interest of the council which meant that it would be unreasonable for us to charge them a penalty, and therefore mitigation would apply, so a blue status is applied, and that's how it works.
Okay, thank you. May I just ask my second very quick question, Chairman, please? When it comes to the customer service desk, I always find them very impressive. I mean, they do everything they possibly can to help, and the same with the IT desk. I mean, gosh, they're on it before you've virtually given them the problem. And their attitude to people like me who are not necessarily hugely IT savvy is very supportive. They don't make you feel stupid, they make you feel supported, which I think is very important. But one thing I would request, given that when we're ringing in, normally we would ring into internal numbers, but sometimes it's necessary for councillors to use the general councillor number. It would be very useful to have a route in for councillors. You actually have business and you have public, you know, they ask who you are basically, but it would be very good to have a little route in if you are a councillor, so that we can get in more quickly, or to somebody who knows where to send us directly. So I would like to have that option when I ring, so I can say, councillor, press this number and I can get in. Because often we're ringing on behalf of hundreds of people, and sometimes we do need a quick answer when we don't necessarily need to know who to go to internally. It's rare, it's not common, but it would be a useful extra service if that is possible, please. So just a little request there. Thank you.
or it'll be considered within the both officer and senior councillor world. Okay, so who's next? Yep, Martin.
Thank you. Very useful and interesting debate, actually. So I think there's some valid points being made. In terms of Councillor Brockway's point about the licences, that's actually a good news story, because as part of the transformation programme we're undertaking, we are actually hoping going to achieve a reduction in the number of licences we have from Microsoft, which is good news because they are very expensive. So I can't remember the figures, but obviously here was a thought we might increase the number, and although it's caused some minor disruption, I think it's good that the action was taken to at least hold the line. But in future there is a expectation, and more than a hope, I think they will deliver fewer requirements for these expensive licenses. The CSC, I mean, again, I think that's very interesting. And as Arnold says, there is a huge number of data out there in the system. But I think what would be helpful for the committee is to, when there is mitigation, to have quantify, which I think was your point, quantify what actually that means, because I'm sure, you know, we believe you, but it would be very helpful for all of us to actually see what that effect was. Of course, the callback system is relatively new, and obviously that does mean that, you know, that means less calls are dropped. But again, it would be useful to see what happened there. And I think also it'd be the interesting thing to look at is, of the callbacks, what was the success rate, etc. So there is some detail in there. There is a huge amount of data which we hold, and I think it's right that you probably wouldn't want to see everything, but I think in exceptional circumstances, pulling out the relevant data so that we can see for ourselves what's happened is probably the best way forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else want to speak? No? Okay, well, we've got a proposal, which I'll read out. I propose that the board has been assured on the performance of the corporate support services contracts, and that we receive the next update at our meeting on the 26th of October, as scheduled in the work programme. I think I'd like to add, and that we have a meeting outside of this meeting between officers and members in relation to some of the points that have been raised. Can you please raise your hand if you agree with that? Anyone against? No? Anyone want to abstain? No? Okay, fine, thank you. That's that agreed. Thanks for your time, Arnd and Ian. Yep. Okay, so we move on to item 9, Household Support Fund Grant Scheme Utilisation 23-24. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. So I've come today to provide a report to invite the Overview Scrutiny and Management Board to consider the report on the Household Support Fund grant utilisation for 2023-24, which is due to be considered by the Leader of the Council between the 5th and the 12th of May. The views of the Board will be reported to the Leader as part of this process for consideration. Okay, so I'll give you an overview of the fund and be happy to answer any questions following that. So the government have confirmed that the Household Support Fund will be extended from the 1st of April 2023 to the 31st of March 2024. This will be the 4th tranche of this funding. Previously, they have been in 6-month periods. This will be the first time that we'll have the funding for a 12-month period. The paper sets out the government's aim for the Household Support Fund and also sets out Lincolnshire allocation, which for this period is almost £11 million. The report seeks the approval for the preferred option, which is for the council to work with partners, including district council, schools, early years providers and other third-party providers, in order that we can target cohorts across the county to benefit and distribute this fund as widely as possible. The Household Support Fund has been discussed with district councils, and we've got a working group that have been a collective of officers across both the council and district councils across the county, and we'll happily take you through those options now. So the option we're putting forward is a combination of us working in partnership. Other options have been considered, including for the district councils to distribute this fund in its entirety, for the county council to distribute this fund in its entirety, or for us to decline the option to distribute this funding, which I don't think any colleagues or councillors would be supportive of. So the preferred option that we've come is a partnership approach. The benefits for this have been set out also within the paper. However, the details of the option we've put forward is for approximately 43% of the Household Support Fund grant over the 12-month period to be appropriately delegated to schools and early years providers targeting children eligible for benefit-related free school meals, early years pupil premium, and families with 2-year-olds eligible for early years entitlement. For approximately 44% to be directed through our Lincolnshire district councils to provide financial support to housing benefit only claimants who have not been in receipt of any other support with regard to the National Cost of Living programme. 1% of the grant to be provided financial support to eligible care leavers in supported living accommodation, and then the remaining percentage to be available to any other households that are in financial need during the grant process period, and those processes will be managed and facilitated by our district council colleagues in order to meet the local needs in their area. This is very similar to the approach we took in Household Support Fund 3, Tranche 3. The two previous tranches 1 and 2 had fixed criteria eligibility criteria that we needed to adhere to. Household Support Fund 1 was 50% to households with children and families and 50% to other households. Household Support Fund 2 was 33.33% to families with children, pensioners and other households. HSF3 was the first one where we had local eligibility criteria that we were able to develop for ourselves. And as this is a 12-month period, this is the first time that the government have required political oversight and sign-off for a cabinet member for our proposals. Within the paper, it also gives a link to the actual guidance for anyone that would prefer to read that for themselves, but I have given a summary within the paper. The delivery plan is expected to be submitted by the 17th of May, which will set out the details of how we are to facilitate and distribute the grant within Lincolnshire. This has gone to every council across the country, so this is a widespread grant available. It is also one of many elements of the government's support around the cost of living challenges that the country and many families are facing, and this is, as I said, our response to how we will deal with that. And I'm happy to answer any questions and give an overview to the paper that we've got already, but I think that's my summary complete. Thank you.
Lovely. Questions? Okay. Yep. Thank you. Hugo.
Thank you. I mean, it is a good amount of money that the government has given us, which is always welcome. And I sometimes wonder, though, whether the longevity of it is quite literally, here's 10 million and poof, it's gone. And it would be nice if there was more sort of longevity, and I know our hands are tied on it. But when we talk about free school meals, and I'm not against that at all, but I think there's more of an education about how actually people can save money and how actually parents can shop better, wiser, and actually give healthier meals and stop sort of some of what I call everyday needs. Everybody seems to think that a coffee at £3.50 is an essential item today from a high coffee shop, when actually £3.50 actually can basically get you quite a few chicken breasts actually, and you can actually eat quite healthily if you actually are shown how to. And I think that there's a failing in the systems, not in our systems, but centrally, that we don't actually give enough guidance and advice to people and help them in their lives. You come out of school, all the rage now is let's get a maths certificate, but actually there's no benefit to how you actually conduct your bank account, your personal affairs, what your student loans really means, and all the financial implications to run your daily life. And I think we do miss that trick, and here would have been another great idea of how we could have supported that. But we are where we are, and we have to run with it. And so I think on that score, we have picked the best model. And the options I do fully support. Just while we are on this money, and I don't know, but there was a thing on the other day about the sort of government supported for children that had fallen behind during COVID, and they call it something like the tutorial fund or something, and I know it's not necessarily to this, but a lot of the money went back because it didn't get spent. And actually, when you looked at it, it was something like, I think, 25% of the money returned back to the Treasury. But when you actually looked at it and came further north, actually, the return and uptake was even less. It was down to like 50%. And because of the constraints of our education systems and everything else. And it's sometimes, I think, it is actually a vital thing that, some of these government schemes actually suit the London schools, but actually really don't necessarily work in principle when it comes to our sort of more northern schools. But that's just my views and comments on this. But I do fully support what's here. Just like everything, I like to see a bit of longevity when you start spending £10 million. But we are where we are. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think it's an important question because I read about that that article about money being returned significantly from the Midland councils and the northern councillors. Can you comment on that specifically, Michelle? Where we stand in relation to returned money?
With regard to this grant, we've fully utilised every element of all of the tranches of this grant to date. So I accept there's other grants that maybe that not be the case, but I'm not familiar with those, wouldn't be able to comment on. With regard to the longevity of that, I think that some of the winter grants and COVID grants that were before this and preceded this, we were hopeful as officers that tranche 1 and 2 would have had that element within it. Unfortunately, it clearly stated that we couldn't provide longevity or financial planning and support and advice for for families within that and the households. However, there is some leniency in this phase of the grant, and so we are looking to work with our district councils about how we can link that to other advice and support systems. However, regardless of that, the people that have access support throughout this have also been offered by the partners that are distributing the fund access to other information, advice and support, whether that be around food preparation, about planning, budgeting, but that has been funded via other routes rather than this. But we have done our best to link that together so we get the best outcome possible of the resources we have available. So I'm afraid that's all I can comment on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, could you pick up that question of whether or not we had to return any money? Because if it's a national issue, I'd be interested in knowing whether Lincolnshire did or didn't.
Yeah, I'd have to come back with a written response to the committee for fear of providing an incorrect answer. But yeah, no, we'll do. Thank you.
Anyone else want to raise anything? Yep. Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I ask my question, I'll go back a bit on what Councillor Malfoy said, and he is exactly right when it comes to the issues of, shall I say, in some instances, priorities, and the new thing is maths, and everybody must have this at 18, but it doesn't teach you how much your tax is worth. It doesn't teach you how to balance your bank book. and how to live off what you earn, which again I think is not specifically related here, but it goes back to your point of there is an issue, it seems, in central government that whilst these schemes look good and they sound good for news bites, sometimes in practicality they just don't function. I mean, the example I can give at Health Scrutiny was the NHS were looking at providing additional appointments for backlogs for dentistry, and Carl will know because we were sitting Health Scrutiny together, the take-up in Lincolnshire was woeful because they just didn't have the staff and the numbers to actually take it up. So the money was there, but the money was sent back because actually there wasn't the sufficient staff there to undertake it. My actual question, Chairman, is in respect of how the HSF will assist with disabled people who are working, but who do not, for a number of reasons, claim means-tested benefits. Now, because, and I suppose in this sense, Chairman, I have a partial interest being someone who's disabled and working and isn't on any of that. If you compare it to other vulnerable groups of people through central government schemes, that group of people has been far less supported financially and in any other way compared to any other vulnerable group throughout this whole process. Yet they are often the ones who struggle most because they don't necessarily claim everything they could potentially claim, or because they're often forgotten because it's, oh, you're working, you're fine. Yes, I am, or, you know, an individual is, but they have hindrances and issues because of their disabilities that aren't factored into a lot of central government thinking, it seems. And I just wonder how our scheme can try and mitigate some of that that's happened through the central government schemes.
Yep. Councillor Hill. Right. If that's okay, do you want to comment on that?
Okay, I can do. The application-based element is purely for that purpose, so you don't fit into the other cohorts, but you feel you're financially struggling or need some additional support. And we're working really closely with our district colleagues to target particular cohorts within their communities. We know that our Lincolnshire is big, and we do have different needs across our county that districts are able to support with. And I think that supports the partnership approach that we're taking, and the fact that we have had that local flexibility, and over £1 million of this will be targeted through that route across the county over the next 12 months. So hopefully it might not reach everyone, but it will reach some of those.
Okay, Martin and then Jackie.
Just to come to that point, I think that the issue both of why we felt it was a good idea to delegate most of this money either to schools or to district councils is probably they are both better placed in terms of schools knowing which pupils might need extra support, and obviously district councils have more knowledge of the benefits arrangements. So if you'll see in the paper that there is an arrangement where the expectation is where people who fall through the cracks, so to speak, and there should be an awareness that people who can access that if they apply. So I think that's a good reason why we felt it's not to try and do it all ourselves. It's probably a reason why I believe that our return rate was very low back to government. And just to reassure the committee that although it didn't require political sign-off up to now, it has definitely had political overview ever since the very first scheme was announced some years ago. But it is yet again another substantial tranche of money which the government has made available, particularly in light of the cost of living crisis and the legacy of COVID, that there are huge sums of money, because this is just Lincolnshire, so nationally it's a huge sums of money which the government continues to put forward which to support those people who will need continuing support throughout the years. But I don't think we should expect this to carry on indefinitely. There will come a time where things settle down in terms of cost of living, and then new arrangements will be in place.
Thank you for that. Jackie.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I noticed on page 36 you're talking about making 11% of the grant available to the district councils on a proportionate basis. I'd like to know what that proportionate basis is, please, because I've had contact from Ian Knowles at West Lindsay. There's concern with regard to the housing area because West Lindsay doesn't, and West Lindsay's my division's there, and also I am a West Lindsay councillor, just to declare personal interest there. But there is concern that because they don't carry their own housing stock and other councils do, other councils are able to carry forward certain monies whereas they're not, and they're at a disadvantage. So I would actually urge you or request that you contact Ian Knowles, please, because they have actually appealed to West Lindsay county councillors to raise this to this council's attention because they do feel that they are at a considerable disadvantage. So the question after that spiel is on what basis, what proportionate basis are you making this decision, please? Thank you.
Okay, happily answer that. So we are using the indices of multiple deprivation in order to divide that up, so it's on a percentage basis. And Andrew, one of Andrew's colleagues, kindly pointed out that proportionate means equal, and that's not the case. So financially, there will be a percentage basis allocated based on the multiple deprivation, and that will reflect the whole county. So it will be slightly different, but will be weighted towards the areas of deprivation within our district council areas. So apologies for the accuracy, was picked up after the report was submitted. So I'll stand corrected and give assurance that Andrew has, throughout all of that, had oversight of that, and our financial colleagues have attended all of the working groups from start to finish and worked very closely with us to make sure we fully utilise that.
Thanks. Anybody else? Yeah, Eddie.
Thank you, Chairman. Michelle, I apologise if you've already covered this, but I didn't hear anything on it. Regarding on page 40, you've got, and I'm fully supportive of option 3, but you've got the barriers at the bottom of there. I understand the first sentence, and there's mitigation in the sense that there's support already in place for the distribution method, but in the second sentence, it also says a strain on the existing resources. But there's no mitigation after that explains on how that might actually be covered, although it's covering all different areas, i.e. districts, schools, etc. I just wondered how much extra strain on existing resources that might put on these organisations, and if indeed they can cope with them. I think it's following on from the fact that, you know, if they can't cope with them, then does the money have to be sent back, basically. So that's my question. Thank you.
I think this is an acknowledgement that all partners that are supporting the distribution of this are absorbing costs where they possibly can. And we have done that in Lincolnshire, I think, better than a lot of the other councils that I've been working with, in order that we know as many of these pounds go into the pockets of our households. However, there are some organisations that are not able to carry that strain as easily as others, and particularly early years providers that are often very small voluntary organisations, etc. And so our voluntary sector colleagues have found this the most difficult to absorb those costs, and we have done our very best to then attribute administration costs where we can within the grant to do that, but keeping them as low as possible. An example of that, I know previously in one of the earlier rounds, our CAB colleagues were one of our partners with our districts, and they found the influx and demand on their services because of administering this on our behalf was significant. And so in order for us to do that, they then became a point of contact rather than a delivery partner, and we took an alternative route to do that. So we tried to learn and reflect from each of that, but where administrative costs are able to be evidenced, they're within the grant, and we do ensure that we offer those to our partners. Okay.
Thanks. Anyone else? I've got a question. I know this is it the third or fourth tranche of money that's come in? So we've got some expertise working with the district councils, because although it seems as though the money's coming into the county, it's going out. Okay. So we are setting certain conditions in this paper. The 42 two lots of 44% and a 10%. And I just wonder, have we got any responsibility for monitoring whether or not the good things that are in here are actually delivered by the district councils? And I can't remember, to be honest, whether or not we, as an OSMB, had reports back on the other 3 tranches. I just can't remember. And I'm just interested in knowing what period of time you think that this money will be spent over, and whether or not we could get, as an OSMB committee, a report back identifying how the money is being spent, not to the detail, but on what sort of issues, because there are quite different things between 43% through appropriate delegation to schools, that's one chunk, another 44% to district councils, and they pick up another 10% on a proportionate basis to provide support to other households in need. None of that is very specific, and I'm just interested in as if nobody else, monitoring it.
Okay, yes, I can confirm we've got, there are a range of monitoring mechanisms, both between the district councils and ourselves, because we have the responsibility for administration of this grant. So the funding that goes out to districts is retrospective, so they commit the funding, and when they've then evidenced who and how they've spent that, then that is then allocated to them via the county council. We are doing that. We appreciate the funding of this scale, so they do that on a monthly basis. In the previous rounds, over the 6 months, we've had 6 monthly reports from each of the district councils as to the spend levels. We also have to provide to the Department for Work and Pensions the type of household, so details on whether they're families with children, whether they're families that are pensioners or with disabilities. So there's a range of information, management information, that we have responsibility to provide and collate. Within the grant, each grant, the time periods are set out within the grant criteria, and for this one being a 12-month period, it's likely to be quarterly over the 12-month period. I can give you some more specifics with regard to that. Obviously, the numbers eligible would fluctuate, so these are estimates, but for example, with the free school meals, we estimate that the allocation of 44% would in reality be approximately £75 per pupil in the summer term, so anyone eligible in this academic year, and then to cover next academic year we'll be looking at a date probably in around November. Those 2 periods over the 12 months will ensure that each child eligible gets £75 on both occasions. That will mean that year 11s, for people who understand school years, will not have left this year, so they will benefit from that. And then reception age children joining the academic cycle in next financial year, in the next academic year, will cover this financial period. So hopefully we've been able to do that with our children's services colleagues, although the finer detail of that we still need to do once we've had the decision from yourself, from the leader, and obviously feedback from this process today. With regard to the household benefit only scheme through the districts obviously have their own decision-making process to go to, but the ambition for them is to meet the national cost of living payment for those households that haven't benefited from that. So that will be an approximate around £900 for those eligible households, and we estimate that to be approximately 5,316, but obviously that will be determined by the eligible date that we set, because obviously people come eligible and the circumstances change for that. So at the end of that, we do have to submit all of that information to the Department for Work and Pensions. So if there is a need or a requirement that the board would be interested in the outcome of that, then we can work with colleagues to timetable that in at the appropriate time when we've got all that information available.
Anybody else? Okay, no, can we turn to page 36? The reason I'm saying that is because the recommendation has 5 bullet points to it. But essentially, we're approving the following delivery plan principles for the distribution of the Household Support Fund for 2023-24. I'm not going to go through them, but we've all got a copy available to us. That's the first point. And then authorises the Assistant Director to work in partnership with schools, early years providers and district councils as recognised trusted partners to give effect to the above decision. Those in favour, please indicate. Yep. Those against? Those abstaining? Okay, what we've got on page 36 has been agreed. Thank you. And thanks for your report, Michelle. Thanks. So we move to item 10, Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, Scrutiny Committee Work Programme, Environment and Economy, Scrutiny Committee. Environment and Scrutiny Committee report first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The committee has met twice since our last update in January and considered the items set out on pages 50 to 54 at our meetings held in February and April. I'll briefly report on each. Starting with February, the committee, amongst other things, considered an update on the proposed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF, and the wider planning system, that being contained in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and the committee looked at the likely implications for Lincolnshire. And the committee did have a number of concerns which were raised in relation to the bill, such as, for example, whether it would provide support against the challenges of climate change, housing and energy security, and also the imposition of a national development management policy which could undermine changes in the varied needs of local developments. Concerns were also raised about the new powers which are known as street vote, which are outlined in the bill, which would allow residents on a street to bring forward proposals for planning permission to extend or redevelop their properties if they were accepted via a residents' referendum on that street. It was felt that this proposal could cause unnecessary neighbour conflict. The Executive Councillor for Economic Development, Environment and Planning confirmed that he was going to submit a formal response to government about the proposed planning changes in the bill and would capture the comments of the committee in his response. Turning, Chairman, to April, one of the key items which we considered at that meeting was an interim report on the Energy for Growth Energy Options Analysis for Greater Lincolnshire. The consultants, Ryder, Levitt and Bucknell, were commissioned by the Greater Lincolnshire Infrastructure Group to undertake an energy options analysis for Greater Lincolnshire in June of 2022. And the key findings identified in what I stress was their interim report were as follows. 1, there is a clear shift toward innovation and alternative energy sources across the region. 2, net zero is a common theme across all sectors, echoed by the shift in energy providers and increase in private investment. And 3, there is inconsistent collaboration across the region. And the committee highlighted that the final report needed more information on solar and offshore energy, and I particularly mean, when we're talking about offshore, not just the fact that there is energy being generated offshore, but how we get it onshore and how we connect it to the national grid. That was confirmed to us as being something which would be in the final version. And also, we were concerned about the flexibility and limitations of the grid, and that should be a key consideration in the final report. Chairman, I just want to reflect on those words, flexibility and limitations of the grid, because they do sound quite anodyne. And the grid is something that I think until perhaps 10 years ago, none of us really thought about very much. It kind of existed magically in the background. It magically balanced supply and demand. The lights, by and large, did not go off, and we didn't think about it. Perhaps we thought about it once a year when the BBC would always run an item on how the grid copes with everybody making a cup of tea at the same time at half-time in the FA Cup final. Beyond that, it just happened. Boy, have things changed. The committee is extremely concerned on 2 counts regarding the grid. The first in terms of supply, and the second in terms of its flexibility to take locally generated renewables, particularly small and medium scale renewables. Fundamentally, the grid is something that was created by our great-grandparents, perhaps our great-great-grandparents, back in the 1920s. It drew together a very disparate system and made it work, but it was all put together in the era of the coal-fired power station. And the committee is concerned that it is still too stuck in that age. It needs to be far, far more flexible. The fundamental concern we have, and remember we are environment and economy, is that perhaps the biggest single drag to significant economic development in Greater Lincolnshire is the difficulty in getting power in particular. I know of some specific examples of that in North Stephen. Interest declared, I'm dual-hatted, but there are examples across Greater Lincolnshire. We're very, very concerned indeed to see this feature very prominently in the final report and to have measures recommended which will dramatically increase both the flexibility of the grid in terms of supplying power to enable economic generation, which is something that this council and our partners and second-tier authorities work very hard on, but also that it is flexible enough to take locally generated renewables. For example, this council, and we've heard reports in our previous meeting of this group, it builds, as does my district council at North Stephen, a significant number of industrial units. We want to make sure, and we can under the new Central Links local plan, that these face in the right direction to capture solar energy. Even the scale of a dozen industrial units can be problematic for our existing energy infrastructure providers in taking the solar energy produced if you cover the roofs in solar panels. We have got to get the grid right. I appreciate that it's an abstruse thing that we haven't thought about very much, but the committee is very, very urgently concerned that that should be put right, and those comments will be reflected, we are assured, in the final report by RLB, which will be considered by the committee at our meeting on the 11th of July. Finally, Chairman, looking ahead to future meetings, the current agendas are set out on pages 54 to 7. I have a couple of changes to report to the work programme. Firstly, the report on the outcomes of the Motorhomes and Caravans Working Group has been deferred from 30th May to 12th September. That is for a good reason. It's to allow for an information gathering exercise to be held with external stakeholders in June. And the second one, Lincolnshire County Council's carbon report for 22-23 has been added to the agenda of the meeting scheduled to be held on the 23rd of October. Chairman, that concludes my update. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I can start. That Energy for Growth options analysis is coming to your committee in July. What's going to happen to it then?
Then it will form the basis of how the partners go forward, Chairman. That would be this council, but also the two unitaries to our immediate north. And I think the most important thing that can happen to it is that it should form the basis of a conversation with the infrastructure providers. It is not the most fashionable subject, it's not the most exciting subject, but getting this right for the future is absolutely essential if we are going to allow our region to grow. So it will form the basis of that conversation, and it will form evidence, Chairman, because it's very easy for us in this council chamber or in other council chambers to say there's a problem. What we need is hard evidence that there is a problem and hard evidence of how potential solutions might work. And that is what we hope that the final report will provide.
Question, what's going to happen to the rest of the county outside of those three districts, in those district areas?
The three unitary areas, Chairman, so the whole of Greater Lincolnshire is included in that. All the districts within this county council, I was referring really to the two unitaries to our immediate north, so the whole of Greater Lincolnshire will be included.
Okay, thanks. Fine, anybody else want to ask? Martin?
It's not a question, Chairman, it's just a point of information on page 52 and 53 about the Thedlethorpe disposal for the facility partnership, community partnership now. Actually, the wording is out of date there. It does state there that the low take-up of the Community Investment Fund, but I can inform the Overview Scrutiny Committee that as your representative on that community partnership, the investment fund is actually oversubscribed for this year, so the community partnership will be actually allocating that money. So I don't know on what basis people were assuming it was not fully subscribed. There was some inaccurate reporting in the media, but the truth of the matter is it is oversubscribed for this year quite substantially.
Anyone else want to raise any questions or comments on the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee activity report? Nope. Okay. Can we move on to Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee then, please?
Thank you, Chairman. The committee has met twice since the last report to this committee, and I'll take the report on pages 59 to 63 as read and focus on the 3 items considered by the committee this Monday, the 24th of April, which are listed at the top of page 60. The committee spent most of its meeting on Monday on the Anglian Water Street Works Performance Improvements item, where we had 3 representatives from Anglian Water present. As part of this item, we learned that Anglian Water is the busiest of the utilities in Lincolnshire in terms of street works, around 20,000 street works permits per year. I must say that the 3 representatives were very frank and put their hands up and said that their performance on street works had just not been good enough, particularly over the last 18 months. And so essentially our concerns with the road closures were not lifted soon enough after Anglian Water had completed its work, and there were reports of damage to grass verges which Anglian Water was not addressing. Anglian Water's action plan for improving performance has already since the 7th of March seen the number of road closures lasting fewer than 3 days increase from 55% to 89%. So they are bringing the time scale down to less than 3 days, which is good in a short time since they've started to implement their action plan. In addition, the County Council has also been invited to participate in Anglian Water's road closure reduction plan. So they're asking our officers to get on board with that. We also focused a lot of our questioning on the proposed street works charter between the council and Anglian Water, where no real progress has been made with the charter since before the pandemic. Anglian Water had been reluctant to sign the charter which had been put in front of them quite a while ago, and they wanted to discuss certain changes. So, but that just hadn't happened. So we've urged that the work on the charter progresses immediately, and we plan to have a draft version of the charter shared with the committee members for our next meeting in May. So Anglian Water and our officers have undertaken to get a draft of that charter to the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee, which is only in 4 weeks' time. So hopeful to move forward with that quickly. In addition to our recommendation on the charter, we will receive a further report from Anglian Water on their street works performance in December 2023. We will expect to see progress with their action plan on reducing the number of road closures and the time taken to lift closures once work has completed. Our report in December will also cover the discussions between Anglian Water and Highways officers on damage to grass verges. The next item on our agenda was the review of traffic management in Lincolnshire working group outcomes. And this report summarises the activity of the committee's working group on whether a review of traffic management merited a scrutiny by one of the scrutiny panels. we agreed that this board would be requested to approve an in-depth review of this topic. I understand a report will be submitted to a later meeting of this board for its consideration. We also approved the initial key lines of inquiry and terms of reference for a review, which were sort of worked up by the working group, and we recorded our thanks to all those involved in the working group for their efforts. Finally, we considered the Transport Q3 performance report, and we were advised of the progress with recruitment to the vacancies in Transport Services team. We were also informed that work on a performance dashboard was continuing and was expected to go live at the end of July this year. Just to go into a point that Councillor Hugo Marfleet mentioned earlier about missing links in the bus services around the county, the Lincolnshire Enhanced Partnership Plan and Scheme for buses also includes a Lincolnshire network review, which is taking place with partners in the county, that bus service operators. So hopefully instances such as Councillor Marfleet has pointed out will be picked up and efforts made to try and fill in those gaps within as a result of that review. So, and that there are two changes to the future work programme which I would like to highlight. Firstly, the Grantham High Street Fund station approach, currently listed as number 2 for the 22nd of May, will move to the 11th of September. And secondly, the bus service improvement plan refresh will also be added to a meeting on the 11th of September. This concludes my update to you and members of the board, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Much appreciated, Mike. Anybody want to ask anything about it? Hugo.
Thank you, Mike. Very comprehensive report, and and thank you, Ian, as well. Just actually 2 little comments, really, and thank you for picking up on the bus thing on the A16. But 2 little things which I noticed the other day, actually, while I was on my travels on the highway, is that near where I live on the Caister High Street, they've just actually done 2 quite good road improvements, which is very welcome. My point of observation is why they didn't tie the 2 in together. There was a gap of about 2 months, so the actual main road got shut twice, and the road resurfacing stopped and then was carried on from where it stopped after 2 months respite, and it should have been dovetailed into one. And the other area is, why didn't they sort out the chevrons, which are there for the cyclists to show them round those steep bends? And they sort of done the great job on the highways, but actually didn't repair the rest of their street furniture, or whatever you call them, the chevrons. It's just really just joining it up a little bit more. And then on an unclassified road round the back there, I had to laugh because there's more potholes than you can imagine, and it's like a real sort of pitted road. And I sort of drove down there, and actually they've done a really good job of sort of repairing a pothole and sealing round the edges. And I'm thinking, well, that's great. And actually they've done it right. But when there's sort of 20 other potholes all around it, actually it needed the jet patcher, not a pothole repair system, when there's that many potholes. And I think sometimes it just wants a bit more foresight, because it is a waste of money when they have sealed and done the potholes properly, when there's so many more round. Actually the jet patcher would have been the best thing to have just stuck in. It's unclassified road, it's a back road, but we have thousands of them in Lincolnshire, and sometimes we need to take a bit more of a pragmatic approach rather than a policy approach. Thank you.
Thanks. Does anybody else want to ask anything about either of the 2 reports, Environment and Economy or Highways? No? Okay, can we agree to receive those reports with thanks? Is that agreed? Please indicate. Thanks a lot. Sorry. Right. So, final item, Overview and Scrutiny Management Board Work Programme. To receive a report which enables the board to note the contents of the work programme. Strictly for noting. Okay. Unless anybody wants to raise anything on it. No? Fine, thank you. Okay. Declare the meeting closed. I should, of course, have said thank you for your attendance. Okay, safe